Johnny Carson was in the middle of his Tonight Show monologue when a guest in the green room started sobbing uncontrollably. What Johnny did next stopped live television and changed 20 million viewers forever. It was Tuesday, March 15th, 1978 at NBC Studios in Burbank, California. Johnny Carson was delivering his opening monologue to a live studio audience of 320 million viewers watching from home. He was in his element, making jokes about President Carter's latest speech and the California weather. The show was running like clockwork. Ed McMahon had just finished his thunderous introduction. Doc Severinsen's band was in perfect harmony, and Johnny's timing was, as always, impeccable. But what none of the 20 million viewers knew was that backstage in the green room, something heartbreaking was unfolding that would soon change the course of live television history. Earlier that day, a 34-year-old elementary school teacher named Sarah Mitchell had won a contest to be a guest on The Tonight Show. It wasn't a big segment, just a brief interview about her innovative teaching methods that had been featured in a local newspaper. Sarah was supposed to be the perfect feel-good guest, a dedicated teacher from a small town in Ohio who had revolutionized how children with learning disabilities approached reading. The producers loved her story because it was wholesome, inspiring, and would give Johnny an easy, heartwarming interview. What the producers didn't know was that Sarah Mitchell was carrying a secret that was slowly destroying her from the inside. 3 weeks earlier, Sarah had received devastating news from her doctor. She had been diagnosed with a rare form of cancer that gave her less than 6 months to live. She hadn't told anyone, not her students, not her colleagues, not even her elderly parents who lived across the country. Sarah had decided to appear on The Tonight Show as her way of saying goodbye to the world, though no one knew it. Sarah was sitting in the green room watching Johnny's monologue on the monitor when something unexpected happened. Johnny made a joke about teachers being unsung heroes who shape the future but never get the recognition they deserve. Teachers, Johnny said with his characteristic smile, they're the real stars. They take kids who can barely tie their shoes and turn them into doctors, lawyers, and maybe even talk show hosts who don't deserve half the attention they get. The audience laughed, but Sarah felt something break inside her chest. She thought about her students. Little Tommy, who had finally learned to read after months of struggle. Amy, who had overcome her stutter. Marcus, who had gone from failing to being at the top of his class. She thought about how she would never see them graduate, never know if her teaching methods would continue to help other children. The tears started slowly, but within seconds, Sarah Mitchell was sobbing uncontrollably. Fred de Cordova, the show's director, was monitoring the green room through a small camera when he noticed Sarah's breakdown. His first instinct was professional. We had 5 minutes until her segment, and a crying guest would ruin the show's upbeat tone. "We've got a problem," Fred whispered into his headset to the other producers. "The teacher is having some kind of breakdown. We need to cut her segment." But something made Fred look closer at the monitor. This wasn't the nervous crying of a star-stuck guest. This was something deeper, more profound. This was the crying of someone carrying unbearable pain. Fred made a decision that would haunt and inspire him for the rest of his career. Instead of cutting Sarah's segment, he sent a note to Johnny on stage. Johnny was in the middle of a joke about California drivers when a stage assistant quietly approached him and handed him a folded piece of paper. This never happened during a live show. Johnny's first reaction was confusion, then concern. He opened the note while maintaining his smile for the cameras. It read, "Johnny Nost Patandis, this our next guest is crying in the green room. Something is seriously wrong. She's not nervous. She's in real pain. I think you need to see this." The stand Fred Johnny Carson had been in live television for over 15 years. He had handled every kind of crisis, power outages, drunk guests, celebrity meltdowns, and technical disasters. But he had never received a note like this. Without missing a beat, Johnny finished his joke, got his laugh, and then did something unprecedented. "Ladies and gentlemen," Johnny said, his voice shifting from comedic to sincere, "I need to take a brief moment here. We'll be right back after this message." He signaled for a commercial break, something that wasn't supposed to happen for another 10 minutes. The moment the cameras stopped rolling, Johnny Carson did something that shocked his entire crew. He walked off stage, past the curtain, and headed straight for the green room. "Johnny, what are you doing?" Fred Cordova called after him. "We've got a show to finish." "The show can wait," Johnny said without turning around. "Someone needs help." Johnny Carson, who was known for maintaining professional distance from guests before interviews, opened the green room door and found Sarah Mitchell sitting alone, tears streaming down her face, trying desperately to compose herself. "I'm sorry," Sarah said immediately, wiping her eyes. "I don't know what's wrong with me. I'll be fine for the interview, I promise." Johnny sat down across from her, not as a talk show host, but as a human being. "What's really going on?" he asked gently. For a moment, Sarah tried to maintain her facade. She started to give Johnny the same explanation she had been giving everyone, that she was just nervous about being on television. But there was something about Johnny Carson's genuine concern, something about the way he was looking at her, not as a celebrity, but as a person that broke down her defenses. "I'm dying," Sarah whispered. So quietly, Johnny had to lean forward to hear her. "I have cancer, 6 months, maybe less. And I came here because I wanted to do something meaningful before I go. I wanted people to know that teachers matter, that what we do matters." The words hung in the air between them. Johnny Carson, who made a living with quick responses and perfect timing, was speechless. Outside the green room, the Tonight Show crew was getting increasingly nervous. They had been in commercial break for 3 minutes, which was an eternity in live television. The network executives were starting to make phone calls. But inside that small room, Johnny Carson was making a decision that would define not just that night show, but his entire legacy. "Sarah," Johnny said finally, "would you be willing to tell that story on television? Not the cancer, that's private if you want it to be, but the story about why teaching matters, because I think America needs to hear it." Sarah looked up at him with red, swollen eyes. "But I'm a mess. I look terrible. This isn't how I wanted to do this." Johnny Carson smiled, not his television smile, but a real, genuine smile that few people ever saw. "Sometimes," he said, "the most important conversations happen when we're not trying to be perfect." When The Tonight Show returned from commercial break, something was different. Johnny Carson was seated at his desk, but his usual playful demeanor had been replaced by something more serious, more authentic. "Ladies and gentlemen," Johnny began, "I want to bring out our next guest now. But before I do, I need to tell you something. A few minutes ago, I met someone backstage who reminded me why I love this job, and more importantly, why some jobs are infinitely more important than mine." The audience, sensing the shift in tone, grew quiet. Our next guest is an elementary school teacher from Ohio. She's here tonight not because she wants to be famous, but because she has something to say about the heroes we rarely celebrate. Please welcome Sarah Mitchell. Sarah Mitchell walked onto the Tonight Show stage with tears still visible in her eyes, but with a dignity and strength that was palpable. The audience, instead of their usual enthusiastic applause, gave her a respectful, almost reverent welcome. Johnny didn't start with his usual small talk. Instead, he looked directly at Sarah and asked, "Tell us why you became a teacher." What followed was unlike any Tonight Show interview before or since. Sarah spoke about her students with such love and passion that her voice broke multiple times. She talked about Tommy, who had dyslexia but had learned to read by associating letters with colors. She described Amy, who had overcome her stutter by first learning to sing words before speaking them. But most importantly, she talked about the moment she realized that teaching wasn't just a jobber. It was a calling to help children discover that they were capable of more than they ever imagined. Halfway through the interview, Johnny asked Sarah about her teaching philosophy. Sarah's answer was simple but profound. "I tell my students that everyone has something special inside them." She said, "My job isn't to put that something there, it's to help them find it and believe in it." Then she paused, looked directly into the camera, and said something that neither Johnny nor the producers had expected. "If you're watching this and you're a child who's struggling in school, if you're someone who's been told you're not smart enough or good enough, I want you to know that you are enough. You have something special inside you. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her voice cracked on the last words, and she began crying again. Not from sadness this time, but from the overwhelming emotion of knowing she was speaking to millions of children who needed to hear those words. Johnny Carson, who had interviewed thousands of guests, found himself crying on live television. What happened next had never occurred in the history of The Tonight Show. Johnny Carson stood up from his desk, walked over to Sarah, and hugged her, not as a television host, but as a human being moved by another human being's story. The studio audience didn't applaud. They didn't cheer. They sat in respectful silence as two people shared a moment of genuine human connection on live television. When Johnny finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I've been doing this show for 16 years. I've talked to movie stars, politicians, comedians, and every kind of celebrity you can imagine. But I want you to know that what you just heard is more important than anything any of those people, including me, have ever said on this stage." After the show, Johnny Carson did something he had never done before. He asked Sarah to stay for a private conversation in his dressing room. It was there that Sarah told Johnny about her diagnosis. She explained that appearing on The Tonight Show was her way of making her life matter, of ensuring that her voice would be heard even after she was gone. Johnny listened in silence, and when Sarah finished speaking, he made her a promise that he would keep secret for the rest of his life. "Sarah," he said, "I want you to know that tonight you didn't just talk to 20 million people. You touched 20 million hearts, and I'm going to make sure your message continues long after tonight." True to his word, Johnny Carson began something that night that would continue for the rest of his career. He started regularly featuring teachers, social workers, nurses, and other everyday heroes on The Tonight Show, always giving them the same respect and platform he gave to major celebrities. But more importantly, Johnny secretly established a foundation that provided funding for innovative teaching programs for children with learning disabilities. The foundation's first grant went to expanding Sarah Mitchell's teaching methods to schools across the country. Johnny never mentioned the foundation on television. He never used it for publicity. He simply wanted to ensure that Sarah's work would continue. Sarah Mitchell lived for 11 months after her appearance on The Tonight Show, 5 months longer than her doctors had predicted. She spent those months traveling to schools across the country, training other teachers in her methods, and sharing her message of hope with thousands of children. When she passed away in February 1979, she was surrounded by former students, fellow teachers, and educators whose lives she had touched. Among the flowers at her funeral was a simple arrangement with a card that read, "Thank you for reminding me why this matters." Next, that Tonight Show episode became legendary among television insiders, but for years it was nearly impossible to find. Johnny Carson had instructed NBC to limit reruns of the episode, feeling that Sarah's story was too personal and meaningful to be treated as regular entertainment. However, bootleg recordings of the interview circulated among educators for decades. Teachers would show it to their students as an example of how one person's passion could change lives. Education schools used it as a teaching tool about the profound impact educators can have. In 1992, when Johnny Carson retired from The Tonight Show, he mentioned Sarah Mitchell in his final monologue. 16 years ago, he said, "A teacher from Ohio taught me that the most important conversations aren't always the funniest ones. She reminded me that some stories are too important for jokes. Sarah, if you're listening wherever you are, thank you for showing me what really matters." Today, the Johnny Carson Foundation for Educational Innovation continues to fund programs for children with learning disabilities. The foundation's headquarters displays a photo from that March night in 1978. Johnny Carson hugging Sarah Mitchell on The Tonight Show stage. Beneath the photo is a plaque with Sarah's words, "Everyone has something special inside them. Our job is to help them find it and believe in it." To date, the foundation has helped over 50,000 children with learning disabilities, trained thousands of teachers in innovative methods, and funded research that has revolutionized how we understand and support struggling learners. The night Johnny Carson stopped live television for a crying guest became a turning point not just for The Tonight Show, but for television itself. It proved that audiences were hungry for authentic human connection, not just entertainment. Other talk show hosts began to follow Johnny's example, using their platforms to highlight important social issues and everyday heroes. The model of using celebrity to amplify meaningful voices became a standard approach in television. But more importantly, that night proved that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply listen to someone who needs to be heard. Johnny Carson once said in a rare interview that the night he met Sarah Mitchell was the night he truly understood the responsibility that came with his platform. "I thought my job was to make people laugh," he said. "But Sarah taught me that sometimes my job is to make people think, to make them feel, to make them remember what's important." Today, whenever a television host uses their platform to highlight an important cause or to give voice to someone who might not otherwise be heard, They are following the example Johnny Carson set that March night in 1978. The night he chose humanity over showbiz. The night he proved that sometimes the best television happens when you stop trying to make television and start trying to make a difference. Sarah Mitchell came to The Tonight Show to talk about teaching. Instead, she taught America and Johnny Carson a lesson that would last a lifetime. If this incredible story of compassion and the power of genuine human connection moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. For more amazing true stories about the Heart Entertainment's greatest legends, share this video with a teacher who has made a difference in your life. And let us know in the comments about a time when someone showed you unexpected kindness. Don't forget to ring that notification bell for more inspiring stories about the moments when celebrities chose humanity over fame.